As we kickstart business news at this hour, looking at developments around medical aid scheme costs, as there is a proposal to cap contribution increases in 2023. Now, the recommendation by the Council for Medical Schemes is based on the forecasted level of CPI for 2023 provided by the South African Reserve Bank. Paresh Prema from Alexforbes speaks to us more about this matter. Thank you so much for your time, Paresh. Let's first deal with the justifications in this regard. Consumers are cash-strapped, and a cap on an increase in medical aid scheme costs would be welcomed.
Good morning to you and your listeners. Yeah, well, it would be welcomed based on, the current economic climate with consumers being cash-strapped. But you must remember that medical scheme costs are based on or driven a lot by CPI. So the recommendation provided by the CMS is to say this is the consideration or recommendation we make for going into 2023 when you're considering increasing your contribution going into next year, and must take into account affordability and the cost increases that you as a medical scheme will face going into 2023.
That's quite interesting, because we saw similar type of relief during the effects of COVID-19, where South Africans had somewhat of a relief in terms of medical aid scheme contributions not going up. What lessons have we learned from that particular period?
So I think what is important to note with any medical scheme funding environment, costs for providing services will continue rising every year as providers need to accommodate for the cost of providing the service, staff costs, equipment costs, and things like that. So we know that the costs will keep on rising. What happened since the pandemic in 2020 and 2021, we see that members of medical schemes didn't access benefits as much as they did in the past because obviously of lockdowns and the restriction on movement and things, so that accessing of services were less. So medical schemes were able to save the claims that they would have originally paid in their reserves, and that was the reason for the lower increases that we've seen. But with the lockdowns and things being lifted, we do see people coming back to the normal usage and claiming patterns in medical schemes. So we will see a rise in costs and resultant contribution increases into.
And it's the latter, Paresh, that I ask my next question around the sustainability or consistency thereof when it comes to a proposed cap in this regard. What then happens to the stability of the medical aid scheme landscape? How much of a difference is a cap going to make?
So it's important to note that medical schemes are obliged by law to pay for claims that are required in terms of prescribed minimum benefits and in terms of the rules. So if we were to cap the contribution increase, we would find that some medical schemes wouldn't be able to cope with the limited contribution increase versus the cost that they face by paying for the claims of its members. And remember, these are members' funds, so it would be in the best interest of medical schemes to ensure whatever they collect in contribution is sufficient to pay for claims. We'll see the developments coming into 2023 when medical schemes launch their price increases, and we'll see the resultant effect of, the expected claims that they're going to experience in 2023.
On that note, would this be setting a precedent of sorts, especially because from time to time, the markets and activity in terms of economics need to be weighed on what pressure is on the South African consumer. And of late, we are seeing that households are under immense pressure in the country.
Yes, I think that also the important point to note is medical schemes we want to ensure that they're not put under pressure and they are able to deal with the claims experience that they would be getting into 2023. We do understand that, with the current rising inflation, that is a concern, and that will obviously drive the contribution increase. And those increases in inflation are also experienced by the general public, and that's also reduces the disposable income that they will have available to fund medical scheme cover.
Lastly, how has the industry received this proposal? And I ask this question really trying to figure out whether this is a development that may shake the industry, especially as we've already seen that there are other products in the market that aim to counter the increasing affordability when it comes to medical aid costs.
Yeah. So when we look at the capping or the guide that's provided by the Council for Medical Schemes, they also have a responsibility to ensure the industry is sustainable. So the guide is providing a reference point for medical schemes and providers when they negotiate fees for 2023, because we want to ensure that we use the lower band of CPI when we're going into negotiations, because those feed back to members. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind when we talk about capping and contribution increases going into 2023. There are other elements that affect medical schemes like aging, utilization, and things like that are outside of the medical scheme's control, which they would need increases to actually account for that. So I think the CMS is aware of the challenges and the different movements of the industry, and will use that as when they make decisions around approving contributions for medical schemes. But I think the guide is useful for medical schemes when they consider doing their pricing for 2023.
Paresh Prema from Alexforbes, thank you so much for your time and insights.